This is footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. That's Azar, the playbook Emery Hunt, and I'm Tyler Merkovich, bringing you an FCS preview of the Big Sky Conference. And let's start out with the Montana Grizzlies. Bobby Hawk, 14-2 last year, the runner-up in the FCS as they lost to Richmond. They bring back 12 returning starters, including leading rusher Chase Reynolds, who had 22 touchdowns last year.
Chase Reynolds is a phenomenal running back. 22 touchdowns last season, 1,600 yards, 5.6 yards a carry. So he can move the chains. He's going to be the fuel that drives that offense out there in Montana. You look at, they have a young offensive line. They lose a lot of all-conference players, so it's going to be tough. You may see his numbers drop a little bit, but as that offensive line starts to gel, look for him to pick it back up late in the season. And with quarterback Andrew Sell has to replace Colt Berquist. So that's a big key too. They replaced their top quarterback last season. So how that's going to improve, we don't know. We just hope that they can lean on that running game and lean on that wide receiver out there. They have a good one in Mark Marani.
Gave up a conference worst 55 sacks in 08, 7 in the championship versus Richmond. Left tackle Levi Horn returns and needs to anchor that offensive line.
Yeah, well, they're going to have to, if they can get time, they do have a great receiver out there. Mark Marani, 15 touchdowns last season, 1,300 yards. But the key is you got a new quarterback and a new a young offensive line. That can be a recipe for disaster.
Defensive side of the ball, they lose D-tackle Craig Metler and leading tackler linebacker Colt Anderson, but they bring back free safety Shane Schillinger, 108 tackles and 4 interceptions.
Well, they have a good player at every level of their defense. On the defensive line, you look at Jace Palmer, 8.5 sacks. You look at linebacker Sean Lepsock, 102 tackles. He's a good player. You look at cornerback Tremaine Johnson, 4 interceptions, and you mentioned the free safety Shane Schillinger, 100 tackles. That's impressive. 4 interceptions and 10 pass breakups. So he gets around the ball a lot, and he gets his hands on a lot of passes as well too.
Eastern Washington, Bo Baldwin, 6-5 last year. The past administration has the NCAA pending a ban from the playoffs, but they returned 15 starters, including Matt Nichols, and his top 4 receivers, including Aaron Boyce, 10 touchdowns, 900-plus yards.
Yeah, Boyce is a real good player. I like Boyce, and I also like Bronson Brown. It's another guy, 700 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns. Matt Nichols is a great quarterback. I like Matt Nichols. He does that he runs that offense well out there in Eastern Washington. One thing he has to do, he has to cut down on his interceptions. 21 touchdown passes, 61% completion percentage. So he's a real good quarterback. He's accurate. That passing game will once again be a strength. You have 8 starters returning on that offense. So look for Eastern Washington to continue that success they have on offense. But any production out that running game will be a huge plus, because last year they struggled 3.6 yards per carry. They have to find a running game to balance out that passing attack.
You can't start talking about their defense without starting with their all-time sack leader, defensive end Greg Peach is back, and the middle is anchored by Zach Johnson and another Johnson in the secondary, strong safety Matt.
Well, both of those guys are real good. Both the Johnsons are real good players. You look at that run defense last year, they were phenomenal. 2.8 yards per carry they were giving up. 94 yards a game. That's huge. That's getting every team in a third and long situation. I like that run defense. That pass defense, though, has to tighten up a little bit. 64% completion percentage. Maybe that's because a lot of teams couldn't run on them, so it was forced to pass, but they have to tighten up that pass defense. Also keep an eye on Tywan Jones, a terror on special teams. He's a cornerback, 36 yards per kickoff return, and a touchdown last season. But you mentioned Zach Johnson, 96 tackles, 8.5 TFLs, tackles for loss. You also look at his friend back in the secondary, Matt Johnson, 4 interceptions. So they get their hands on a lot of balls as well too.
They will be contending for the Big Sky title this year.
Definitely.
Weber's State Wildcats were 7th in FCS in total offense. Ron McBride is 25-22, 10-4 last year, 9 returning starters. And, of course, the player of the year in the conference, Cameron Higgins, ridiculous 4,477 yards through the air, 36 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, and running back Trevin Smith.
One thing about Hughes is that he is accurate with the football, 66% passes completed, and that's saying a lot to say they toss the ball around like that up there in Utah. I like the way Weber State plays offense. Trevin Smith, 1,600 yards rushing. That's phenomenal to say they throw the ball so much. He's also an excellent receiver, pass receiver out the backfield. He had 800 yards receiving, so that's pretty good back. You get the production in the running game, and also you get the production out the passing game from one guy. I like that about him. 21 touchdowns last season, 5.5 yards a carry. You look at wide receivers, Tim Toon, 1,500 yards, 7 touchdowns. That's impressive. Cody Nakamura, 700 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns. That's a lot of production out your battery of your offense, your quarterback, your running back, and your 2 receivers.
If there was any such thing as fantasy football in FCS, Cameron Higgins and Trevin Smith would be your first-round picks.
Definitely.
Defensive side of the ball, All-American safety, Bo Hadley, 121 tackles and 4 interceptions. And DN Kevin Linehan recorded 10.5 sacks last year. These are the two key cogs in the Wildcats defense.
Well, one thing they might do, they might have to take a step back as far as like defensively, because they only returned 3 starters. But they do have some key guys like you mentioned. Bo Hadley and Kevin Linehan, and also cornerback Josh Morris, 9 pass breakups and 5 interceptions. So if they can find some people to play linebacker and get some movement around on their defensive line, they might be okay. The 2 big questions I have with Weber State is they're going to take a step back on defense, and their offensive line, they have to replace 3 starters. 2 of them on the left side, so they have to find a way to plug those pieces. But they bring back on the offensive line, they do bring back all conference center Kyle Mutcher and right guard J.C. Oran. So offensively and defensively, they got to move some pieces around, but they do have the main cog on offense in place, the quarterback, running back, and receiver.
2 FBS opponents they faced at Wyoming, at Colorado State. Don't be surprised if one of them gets defeated by the Wildcats' high-powered offense.
If not both.
The Montana State Bobcats, Rob Ash, 13-10 in his 2 years, 7-5 last year, 12 returning starters. Cody Kemp, who was injured last year, came over from Oregon. He's going to be their quarterback. They lose Demetrius Crawford, but Deshaun Thomas returns, and they add another Oregon transfer in Elvis Akpa.
Well, you look at Cody Kemp has to improve. 51% completion percentage, 9 touchdowns, only 12 interceptions. So that has to pick up. They lose their top rushers, but I think the combination of Aaron Mason and C.J. Palmer might be enough to compensate if they use them as a tandem. Those 2 guys are real good players. They should help move the chains. Wide receiver is a weak spot of this team. Bottom line, you look at they have to improve their inexperience, so you have to get production off these guys early in the season. And the offensive line, though, is a veteran group, returns 4 starters.
Defensive side of the ball, 8 of the top 10 tacklers returned. This is an improving unit. Free safety Kevin Rettoriano, 3 interceptions, all to the house last year.
Oh man, that's one thing. Not only is it tough to catch an interception, but it's also tough to bring him back to the house. So that's
not everyone's Ed Reed.
Exactly. That's an awesome player they have back there at Montana State. Their run defense was outstanding last season, 2.6 yards a carry. So they stuffed the run through the Bobcats. You also look at the linebackers. The outside linebackers are real solid. You look at Chase Gazzaro, 62 tackles, 4.5 sacks. You look at Jeff Price, the other side, the weak side linebacker, 5.5 tackles for loss and 2 interceptions. So if they can find, some defensive line help, they could be fine on defense, but they do have solid linebackers. And you mentioned Corey Nichols, 4 interceptions, and Kevin Rettoriano, 3 interceptions for touchdowns. So the back 7 are awesome. They got to get the front 4 intact.